Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
I think with everything in life, it's all about experience. So it's a learned technique. When we work with individuals, whether it's groups or individuals one-on-one, what we are going to do is first increase their awareness. And I always tell individuals, once you understand why do you behave the way you behave, why do you say what you say, which is all defining influence or not defining influence, once you're more aware of yourself, you're more aware of others.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most listened to B2B sales show. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe. And with that, let's meet today's guest.
Hi, I'm Stacey Hanke. I'm based in Chicago. I've been running a company for 16 years called Stacey Hanke Inc. And my team helps leaders, directors to CEOs and sales professionals how to make sure that they know how much influence they really have rather than what they believe to be true. And we do that through communication behavior and messaging.
On this episode of The Legend that is Stacey, we're diving into influence, how you can become more influential in the corporate world. Essentially, what you can do to not really raise your status, because that's one thing that's given to you with a job title, how with any job title, even a job title as a humble B2B quota-carrying sales professional like you and I, how we can become highly influential in any corporate B2B setting. Let's jump right in. Is the ability to influence, is this something that we are born with? Is this in our DNA? Are some people just better influencers and leaders than others? Or is this a skill set that we can learn? Or is this perhaps something that we can uncover that we already have even?
I wish it was that easy. You just wake up and suddenly, boom, I'm influential. It is not. No leader is born with it. What I have learned over the past 16 years is those that we perceive as having influence consistently Monday to Monday truly are those that work with it. To answer your second question, yes, it is something, influence, that you can accomplish and sustain. My big comment, though, when we get clients asking us, hey, can you teach our executives how to be more influential and will it work? My first response is, it'll work if, there's always an if, are they willing to do the work? And are they willing to be consistent at it? Because I think even once you get more aware of how much influence you have, how much influence you don't have, and then what to do to make sure you're constantly growing the influence, you start to feel that consistency. And then lo and behold, you just keep floating on the comfort level, not realizing there's other areas of opportunities. My point here, I think growing influence is a long-term, long life journey. And that's what makes influence Monday to Monday so difficult.
So we'll come on to how we grow it in ourselves in a second, but just to flip the script slightly, is perceived influence when we see it in other people, is this something that is hardwired into our brains, or is this something that we learn over time that this person is influential, we should treat them a certain way or respect or whatever it is?
I think with everything in life, it's all about experience. So it's a learned technique. When we work with individuals, whether it's groups or individuals one-on-one, what we are going to do is first increase their awareness. And I always tell individuals, once you understand why do you behave the way you behave, why do you say what you say, which is all defining influence or not defining influence, once you're more aware of yourself, you're more aware of others. You may not realize now that someone drives you crazy during that meeting because they take so long to get to the point, which causes you to always divert to your emails on your phone. But once you increase your awareness of, gosh, how do I come across, you're going to start to notice in others, what is it about their body language? What is it about their messaging that makes you trust them? That makes you perceive them as, wow, they always seem so confident, so credible. They always have this impact, the way they connect and engage. That's not something that you just fall out of bed one morning and you've got these skills. It's because either they've been coached, I'll guarantee it, either they've been gotten feedback, or another technique that we use is they've been video recorded.
Yeah. On this front then, I'm intrigued. There's multiple levels to all this, clearly, and I'll stick to the CEO, the executive level for a second, then we'll bring it back to us humble kind of quota-carrying sales professionals. But for someone in the C-suite, perhaps they've had some coaching, they're in a Fortune 500 company, whatever it is, they've had some coaching on this. And they go into a room with another man, woman, whoever it is, that have also had coaching on this, and they're both trying to be influential in the same room. Do they look at the person and go, okay, they're doing X, Y, Z, and so they must have influence, they must be influential? Or do they still go in their gut and their subconscious processing of what's going on go, that person has influence? Does that make sense? Is this something that we are consciously thinking about, or is this something that's, even in two trained individuals, it's still happening in our subconscious?
I think a trained individual is definitely more conscious because they know what to look for. The person who isn't trained doesn't understand, why is this person so boring every time I have to do a meeting with them? Why is it internally when this individual starts having a conversation with me, I know it's okay in my mind to check email instead and I'll pretend I'm listening. So I think the more that you're trained or someone gives you feedback around your level of influence, the more conscious you are of what is it? What is this person doing or saying, body language and messaging, that makes me perceive them as more confident, more credible, which all equals to having more influence. And I think that applies to whether it's the CEO or it's the CEO's executive assistant, sales professionals, and everyone in between. I've learned over the years, shockingly, because a lot of my clients will say, well, you work with CEOs. They must all know how to communicate effectively. So here's the deal. They're coming to me because they don't. And it's this, as you climb the ladder, it starts to get lonely at the top. Who's going to tell the CEO that they take too long to get to the point? I will, right?
Yeah.
I think that the challenge with sales professionals going into your network, the challenge with sales professionals, they get so comfortable with their content, with their product knowledge, with their levels of years of experience, their success rate, that I find with sales professionals, they especially don't know what they don't know when it comes to how do I really come across? Unless, again, you're right, they're being trained or they're getting constructive feedback from someone in their life that's saying to them, here's what's working for you, here's what's not, here's how you can correct it.
Okay, so final thing before we get onto the practical element of the show here, and you mentioned this in fewer words. What's the difference between perhaps status and then someone who's truly influential? Because if it's the CEO and I'm a salesperson, it's some kind of internal meeting perhaps, I'm not getting my phone out and checking my emails if the CEO is talking and staring at me. But it doesn't mean that I think they're always perhaps influential. I might think that they're an idiot for whatever reason. They're probably not if they're in that position and the company's successful. But I'm obviously exaggerating here. But what's the difference between them? What's the difference between someone who is just high status, who we've got to respect because of the corporate ladder, versus someone that we are truly kind of wrapped up in, someone who is charismatic, someone who has this influence over us that we want to be led by? What's the difference between that individual and someone who just has the title?
I think with the title, and I'm only speaking from experience from what people have shared with me, I've been in groups before where when we're doing the training, increasing their awareness, they'll make a comment, our CEO is such a bad communicator. You know how many times I hear that? I hear that a lot. Now, I think from a standpoint of, yes, if those two were in a conversation together, they would respect the CEO by not going on their phone. I shouldn't say respect. They probably would listen and pay attention, because respect to me is trust. And those two have to go together. Now, someone who's influential, it could be your Uber driver, someone that you always call. It could be, whoever it is. And there's just this level of, that every time you meet with them, you actually look forward to meeting with them. You know that they're not going to waste your time because they always get to the point. They make you feel good. When people start making you feel good, and I mean connecting, engaging, that's a good sign that you're trusting them. I think there's an extreme difference. And in the book, Influence Redefined, I talk about how our title does not determine the level of influence that we have. I really, really believe that. And that's really just the multitude of individuals I've had the opportunity to work with, where I've worked with an executive's assistant who I admire so much more than perhaps the executive I'm working with. And it just comes down to their inability to convey a message that you really feel like they're knowledgeable, you can trust them, you feel that connection. I keep bringing up connection because I think that's a word that we're starting to lose. And perhaps it is because we spend so much time on our phones. We're all guilty of it. that the level to be able to connect and engage, I think it's a real art to be able to do that consistently.
And it's a real, sorry to interrupt, but I feel we should double down this point of, in sales particularly, it's a real differentiator, right? If all your competition are spamming cold emails or just doing weird cold calls or whatever it is, and you've got the opportunity, even better, to clearly walk into an office and shake hands with someone, but you've got that ability to have that, be that influential person within a space, even if you are, quote unquote, a thought leader or whatever it is, and you can position yourself appropriately within your market. Why would anyone deal with all these schmucks when they can deal with you? It immediately sets you up for success, right?
So true. So true. I've always said to sales professionals, you can be the smartest person in your industry. If you cannot connect, engage, if you cannot communicate the value of that product to solve the problem, I don't think it matters how smart you are. And sales especially, because we tend to all get comfortable. My whole push is get comfortable beyond uncomfortable, constantly check in and get feedback on how do I really come across rather than what everyone else is saying. Now, most sales individuals that we work with understand that they're the profit center of the company. They also understand their ability to build relationships with people, to have influence on the buyer, determines how much money they have in their pocket. So they tend to be, I'm stereotyping here, they tend to be a little bit more aware of this idea of, okay, how am I approaching this person? How do I come across? Probably the number one challenge I hear from sales teams is, can you help me with brevity? I get so excited, so passionate about my product. I tend to say more than I need to. And suddenly I sound like I have been saying the same pitch 550 times in one day.
Yeah. I think, just to double down on this again, salespeople probably have more awareness than someone sat in HR, for example, or accountant, whoever, because if you're an idiot and you're calling on potential customers, they'll probably tell you that you're an idiot, right? If you've got feedback being thrown at you, good, bad, rejection, positivity all the time. So maybe that leads to a bit more self-awareness from salespeople who haven't doubled down on it consciously, almost without recourse. It's coming back at them all the time.
Yeah, that might be it. I'm going to go off of what you just had said. Just a tip for all of our listeners, this whole idea of feedback, and maybe it's more of a friendly reminder. If you really want to accelerate your development, always prepare the feedback. For example, if you and I, prior to getting on the live recording here, I would have said to you, here's what I'm working on. Would you listen for it or would you watch for it? And then afterwards, can you give me feedback? Now, if you are in a situation, I'm thinking sales, I've done some ride-alongs with some of my clients. And in that situation, I'll always instruct the director or the regional sales manager, interactively coach. So when you're in the car or you're in this one-on-one conversation, interactively coach whatever they want coaching on. If it's something we cannot do interactive coaching like this scenario right here, then I'd ask you 5 minutes after our podcast, can you give me feedback on fill in the blank? The more we can prepare for the feedback, the more likely you're actually going to get feedback that will accelerate your development. Because otherwise feedback is, good, nice job, that was great. And what do you do with that? There's absolutely nothing you can do with that.
Okay, so what is step one, to get super practical here? What is step one to understand perhaps what we should even be working on? How do we get that self-awareness from the get-go?
Yeah, the biggest one outside of the feedback, I think these two go together. It's start recording yourself. I mean, you get this. How many podcasts do you do and how many times you've heard yourself on the playback? And it's whether it's video, it's audio, do it on your smartphone. We've got technology to do it. The more that you can see yourself, observe yourself through the eyes and ears of your listeners, the more you are going to constantly develop, because you're worse than your best critic. Otherwise, I really, really believe that if we're not recording ourselves, experiencing ourselves through the eyes and ears of our listeners, we start to rely on how we feel we come across, the level of influence we have, rather than what everyone else is seeing around us. That's huge. Really, if that's just one idea, one concept that your listeners can take away from this episode today, highly recommend it. It will change not only the way you do business, it'll change the types of relationships you're creating and sustaining.
And I'll link to these in the show notes to this episode. And I'm sure you may be aware of a couple of these for salespeople, but if you're doing a lot of calls, there is gong.io, chorus.ai, and Jiminy with two N's, EY.com, that will track your calls, will give you data on how much time you were speaking versus the person that you were chatting to was speaking. And depending on the different platform, will give you different insights and also allow you to share the content with a sales manager who can perhaps then give you insights also in real time on some of these platforms as well. But phone calls is one thing. How do we know what we're good, bad at, perhaps in an in-person meeting? Maybe we can record it. I'm sure it won't be appropriate to record every meeting that we go into, but say we can record it and we're viewing back the footage. Do we treat this like we're playing American football and we're running back the plays and we're trying to suss out what went right or wrong? How do we kind of decode? I guess two questions here. How do we decode whether we have influence, whether we are influential, how kind of, and if that's quantifiable at all? And then how do we code where we're going wrong?
Mm-hmm. I think with sales, it's definitely quantifiable. And I'm just kind of speaking from experience in the work that we do. I know that if I'm not landing sales, something's not working. And it's probably not the product. It's definitely me. If I'm not able to, my whole goal is I really just want to create relationships. That's my first goal, because I want to know too if the client's the right fit for us. From a sales standpoint, your sales start to negatively get impacted or positively get impacted. I would bet that it really comes down to how you make people feel. In addition, you still have to have a good product. You got to have a product that people want. From that point, now it's up to you to really represent it. From a standpoint of when you do get a chance to either audio or video, the first thing you want to do is when you listen to the playback, keep in mind of how you felt during the recording rather than what reality states. And those two might be completely separate. If it's a video, I always watch it first. I just watch everything. Second time around, I get rid of the sound and I only watch me, which is always very eye-opening. The third time, I don't watch it and I only listen. And the fourth time, I put it all together. That's if you've got video. If you've got audio, I listen to it several times with the mindset of, what did I want to say? How did it come across? What am I willing to change and commit to? With both video and audio, it's one thing to sit and watch and listen. It's another thing to take action. And I'll do something really simple with my coaches. After getting feedback, I'll create 3 columns. What worked, what didn't work, what am I willing to change? That's the most powerful column. I find that the more I watch myself on playback, the harder it is. So I would lie if I said, oh, it's so easy now to watch myself. I love it. No, it's harder because you pick up more. Yet I'm always amazed at, I have several coaches in my life. I'll accomplish what they want me to accomplish. And then I've got another habit, a bad habit I picked up somewhere. I don't realize I'm doing it. I don't realize I'm doing it. And this is something I study every day. That's why it's so critical for your listeners. Start recording. And I'm sure, a lot of our sales clients, they do a lot of role playing initially in the initial onboarding process. And there's usually video playbacks that go with that. Yet I find the companies that are calling us are for their sales teams that have been around for a while. When I start to ask, what's the latest training they've been doing? It usually is, well, they did that with the onboarding, and now it's truly solely based on the success, the profit that they're bringing in for the company.
You said something really sobering here, Stacey, and I made a note of it it's not the product, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's not the product, it's you. And I feel I've never really thought about this before, but if I was always in the middle of the pack in sales, I'd always hit my target, but I wouldn't really crush it. But I was not rubbish enough to kind of get sacked. I was always kind of the safe bet to hit target and kind of no one was really partying, no one was throwing Rolexes at me, or there was no kind of holidays or anything thrown my way. But I would always hit target. If someone else in the organization is crushing it, the only variable other than, maybe this is over multiple years, you can gather this data. You might just have a terrible year in your territory because of X, Y, Z or whatever it is. But over multiple years, the only other variable is you, isn't it? And I've never really thought about it like that before. And that's really sobering and humbling. So, and then when you added that layer on top of all we're really doing, if it's the same product, if it's the same or similar marketing, all we're doing, and I love the way you narrow this down, is making people feel different. So if that's the case, and we want to become more influential, make people feel, seemingly good, That's to use a mild words to kind of sum up how we should be interacting, and people should leave conversations feeling great and happy that they've conversed with us. How do we go about doing that? Because there's a simple question, but seemingly like real profound results from it.
I wanted to clarify, how do we get to that point?
How do we make people, and in the context of sales, how do we make people feel good and want to just engage with us? Because we can use all these words of, we can become influential, we can have high status, we can do all this other stuff, we can just be charismatic. But if the end result that we're looking for with all of these is just to make someone feel like, oh, I really enjoyed speaking with Will this afternoon, what's the process of achieving that?
Okay, so big high level. Make it easy for your listeners to listen to you. Make it impactful and interesting that they don't want to check their email. Now, how do you do that? That's where I really break down to, there are about 8 delivery skills, think body language, that make all of that happen. One is brevity. I'd highly recommend for any sales professional, say less, listen more. This is just basic 101, but we have fallen in the trap of, you need to know all 25 years of my experience. No, they don't. They don't care. I hate to tell you, they don't care. It's really making sure that you have lots of pauses. Your sentences are short and to the point to allow your listener to always follow your script every step of the way. And I find most of us, we speak in paragraphs. I talk a lot about what we do with our eyes. How many times, I'm going to demonstrate now, how many times that you're in a conversation and the person that you're talking to is talking someplace else. And already you can feel how different this podcast feels. And that to me is, we all have good eye contact, but not eye connection. I talk about that in the book. The bottom line to eye connection is only speak when you see eyes. No eyes, no talk. I've seen it a lot of times where sales individuals will have something on their iPads or some type of marketing piece, as if I've got it in front of me right now. And half the time I'm spending talking to an object rather than connecting with my listener. Now, why that's important, eye connection is the only skill that builds trust. That's where you get the connection and engagement. The other piece is you're going, well, I guess you can kind of see my gestures. Every time you gesture, you want to make sure there's purpose. Versus, I'm going to demonstrate right now, a lot of times people just gesture to gesture, and it's because we're not aware of it. Well, if I did this for this entire time of this podcast, this is going to get pretty annoying after a while.
And just for everybody who is listening, Stacey's waving her arms around for anyone who isn't watching the video side of things as you're going through that.
And we do. We look like we're going to knock each other out by all the gestures that we use. I talk a lot about having a very open posture. I talk a lot about making sure that every movement you make through your body language, it is consistent. You'll notice I have a lot of facial expressions. You'll hear the different tone in my voice, especially for those that aren't watching the video right now. If I were to say to you, I think influence is really important and all of your listeners should start videotaping themselves, I mean, you hear the totally difference. And that's what I mean by my comment earlier about, it's not just your product in the world of competition that we live and the amount of noise that we now compete against. It's not that your product just stands alone. The product is attached to, who is this buyer going to build a relationship with? Now, there's a whole nother side of it, is all the word choice. Are you saying words that they really get, they understand? Are you saying what you just told the 20 people that you tried to sell to prior? And without pausing, constantly thinking on your feet, there's no way you can be constantly analyzing, adapting your message on the fly. Those are some of the highlights to your question. There's a lot. And I think about an athlete. I think about a tennis player or a golf professional, how much focus they have in every swing that they take a shot at. Communication is the same way. And unfortunately, we have forgotten that it's not just our words that are going to influence. It's the full package of how people experience us.
You did something, and it obviously came natural to you as well, Stacey, which I think is incredibly useful for the audience. And I wish more guests on the show would do it. When I ask a confusing question or just a terrible question, a lot of the guests will try and kind of BS and answer back at me just because they don't want to look like they're not sure what's going on. Which you tried to clarify what I was asking you. And just even that process made your answer a lot more useful than if you just tried to come back from it. And I see salespeople do this regularly as well. Of they'll be going back and forth. They won't quite understand something. And I don't know whether it is, I don't know what it is, but people seemingly are reluctant to, on top of everything else you just described, which is awesome, people seem to be reluctant to even just reiterate a statement or ask someone to qualify what they were describing. I feel like that is something you just glossed over and you just did naturally yourself. It's something that we could really focus on as well.
That's because I'm not a good liar. I'm not a good yeser. I can't do it. And to me, it's all my focus right now is on making you look good, making sure that your viewers get something out of this. I really focus a lot outward during my communication rather than getting stuck in, well, I want to make sure that they hear me say this, or I want to make sure that they hear this about me. I put that stuff to the side. Therefore, when you ask me a question, I want to make sure that what you're asking is something I can even answer. Trust. Clarification with Q&A, to me, that's a big trust part of it. And Q&A is a tough one. With sales, you live and breathe Q&A. Objections, challenging questions. I get a lot of questions asking, well, what if I don't know the answer? You could not be more humble by simply saying, I don't know, but I'll find out. Let me find out for you. Or I was on a sales call right before this podcast, and someone was asking me about how to vision board. I don't even know what that is. I have no idea what that is. So I started to laugh, and they go, well, can you teach vision board? I said to them, I have no idea what that is, which is telling you I probably am not the right person to be teaching that. Well, once they described it, it's a total jargon that they use inside their company on what we really do, but I didn't know what vision board was. To me, it just brings you down to that level of you're really putting all your effort in to make sure that you're not wasting this individual's time, and you're giving it every possible oomph of energy to give it value.
Love it. Is there anything you do before you perhaps get on a call, go to a meeting, to seem as, and I'm hesitant of the words I use. I don't want this to sound wishy-washy or kind of like hippie. I don't expect that you go and sit on a round stone for 20 minutes before you get on a phone call, or you do some, I don't know, Tony Robbins spin round and clap your hands and all that kind of stuff. Maybe you do, I don't know, but
that's right.
Well, what do you do to not necessarily get yourself in the frame of mind of, I'm excited, I can help this person get my energy levels up? Do you do anything just to go, right, I need to get out of my own head because I'm here to help this individual genuinely. I'm here to kind of hear them out, to go back and forth, to consult with them. Do you do anything to get yourself in that frame of mind? Because on the show we talk about getting ourselves excited and raising our energy levels, especially if you're doing the same call every day in, day out. But it seems like the real skill is to be able to just be there for someone.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not perfect at this. I am a work in progress like everyone else is. I really got to shut down the distractions, the things that distract me, the stuff that is on my desk right now, the open folders. I got to get rid of that. I got to shut down that email, or I'm like anyone else, I will check my email if I'm not live. I try to do our sales calls, our interactions with our clients with my webcam on as much as possible, because it forces me to not multitask. That's a big part. I've gotten so much better with mindfulness that when I feel like I'm starting to tip over, I truly do walk away from it a lot more often than I have in the past. And that's just, and maybe it's 5 minutes, if that. That's helped me a lot. So now I'm going to get a little personal with you. I think meditation has been huge. I teach that a lot with some of my more sales top leadership.
Yep.
This whole idea of if you're able to meditate and you know what happens in that moment, you're able to also pull that in when you're in a conversation, because you're more aware of, whoa, I just went to dinner last night. I need to be here right now. That helps a lot. And it's all mind over matter. It's friendly reminders too, where I literally have to tell myself, all right, you can't resolve that problem right now. I've got to make it worth this person's time. I think big picture, if I could put a stamp on top of everything I've just given you, the fact that our name is on everything that we do every day, that's enough for me not to want to mess up.
And what does that mean to you? Is this legacy? Is this just your level of respect within the industry? What does that mean on a kind of on a longer term scale?
Yeah, it's the respect of the reputation I want to create. I don't want to be known as, if you get Stacey on her podcast, half the time she's multitasking. She rambles. She does most of the talking. You can't even get a word in. I've always been like that. I'm very protective of my reputation. And I really do. I want to make people feel good. I want people to want to have conversations with me versus they see my name on their Outlook in the morning, their calendar, and they rather have a root canal than have a conversation with me. And I push that a lot with sales. You're the face of your company, and everything you do, it has your name on it. Even though you might work for IBM or Apple, whatever it is, you're still the one that they interact with. Here's the good news. You get to decide every day what reputation you want to create.
Love it. Okay, so on the meditation front, I've got one thing I want to ask after that, and then we'll wrap up with this. But is there any apps you recommend? Is there any books you recommend for someone who wants to kind of get into meditation? What would be the first port to call?
Yeah, I stumbled on this. It's called Ziva, Z-I-V-A, Ziva Online. I have my mind just stopped. Emily Fletcher. Emily Fletcher is her name. And she's got, just check her out. She just has a really interesting story. And when I first found her over a year ago, it was a 15-day training with her online. And it just has changed the way I feel. It has changed my focus. I have a lot of work to do, a lot of practice to do, but I've lived and breathed that one. I know there's a lot of apps. Why I chose hers, it's so interactive. And once you buy into her group, you are constantly getting information from her and resources that you're not just kind of relying on an app. I need a live body to help me commit.
Good. The reason I ask is I always recommend headspace.com or the Headspace app.
Yes.
Super simple. Andy's been on the show. He, the founder of it all, and dead easy. It's the only thing that I've ever listened to. He's an ex-monk, but you'd never really know it other than his beautiful, gentle
I didn't know
voice.
that.
And I get on well with that as a meditation. But for context, and this is something that came to mind in a conversation a couple of days ago. So billionaires, when you look at the likes of Jeff Bezos, who meditates every day, he's, I can't remember the number, I'll butcher it now, but it was something like for every 10 minutes, or maybe it was every minute, Amazon makes $11 million. So Jeff Bezos is willing to take 20 minutes out of his day, whatever 11 times 20 is, that amount of cash to meditate. So clearly, if a billionaire like that is doing it, and there's plenty of other billionaires that are doing it as well, and there's plenty of science that show the benefits of it. It isn't some kind of hippie thing that we, my grandparents did in the 60s or whatever, kind of filled to the brim with drugs. It's something that is the people at the top of the game of business in the corporate world, they're doing it, and they're willing to put take a bit of cash off the table for that time to invest to then earn more on the back of it. I'm not explaining this very well. I probably need some coaching from yourself on how I communicate on this front. But that's context for me. If someone like that is doing it, if the multiple billionaires are doing it, then there's got to be something to it. And with that, Stacey, final thing to wrap up on here. We've gone back and forth here. Is there anything you'd recommend for me, and this might be useful for the people, especially who are listening to the show, is there any way I can uncover a little bit more influence on the show, whether it's the way I speak, the body language, the communication that we're going back and forth with, how I'm making you feel? Hopefully I'm making you feel comfortable and you're enjoying the conversation so far. Is there anything I can do to improve myself from what you've seen in this conversation?
My gosh, I'm getting totally put on the spot. The first thing that comes to mind, yes, you're making me feel very comfortable. And I think what it was is you and I had a chance to talk, not about business. We just talked, got a chance to know each other. And some people like that, some people don't, right? And from a sales professional's perspective, figure it out. You know how to do that. That's just sales 101.
Sure.
My first thought was you're in an opportunity of all the podcasts that you do. is just keep watching your playbacks, watching the playback through video, watching the playback through audio, and always focus on just one thing. So you've got so much energy in your voice. You're very personal through your facial expressions. I feel like I'm kind of sitting in your studio, which says a lot. Sometimes I don't, and sometimes I want to literally look up because I can't figure out where are they looking? What's going on up there? But from a perspective of the best advice I could give you, just keep watching the recordings that you're doing.
And am I watching myself, or am I listening to what I'm saying and watching your face to see your expression and whether I'm keeping your attention?
That's a good point. I would do all of it. I would watch the recording several times. I think about, you brought up a football coach, and we're big with football here. And one of my friends, her brother is a football coach for the Atlanta Falcons. And I was asking her, what does he do? Like, how does he get there? And she said, he will watch the playbacks for hours and hours in a week. Even if he finds a solution or a strategy off of, finally, okay, by Wednesday I get it, he'll still watch it until the next game that they play. So take it into series. First watching yourself, getting rid of the audio, getting rid of the visual, and then, yes, watching my expression too, or your other guest on your podcast.
Do you know, I've never done it without the audio. It might be really weird to watch. I might do that tomorrow morning as a kind of experiment on this.
It is so odd. That was the first coaching session I ever did. My coach sat down with me, and he sat and he got rid of the audio. And he looks at me and he says, would you want to sit through that? And I remember thinking, oh gosh, okay, I'm never going to forget this moment, but I know there's a learning here. And it does, and I still do it, where I'll get rid of the audio as I watch my playback. It's humbling, to say the least.
Yeah, as I think about this, if you're engaging with someone and there's no sound, and you've got a big miserable mouth on you, and you're not moving your arms somewhat, you're going to look like a psychopath. Even if what the words that are coming out of your mouth sound somewhat interesting, you're probably missing out half the battle there, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, here's why I think that's important, because in a sales situation, if I brought up earlier that we should talk less, right? We know this, it's 101, listen more. When you listen, you still either have it or you don't have influence.
Got it.
People tend to forget that it's not only when you speak, it's from the minute you show up, how do you show up, and then what do you leave behind?
Love it, love it. Well, I've got one final question, Stacey, so I'm going to ask everyone that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, and you could give her one piece of advice, what advice would you give her to help her become better at selling?
I would have been better with getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Through asking for more feedback, getting more coaches earlier in my career, and really practicing everything I preach now as far as videotaping. I just look back and think there's so many people that I interacted with in my earlier sales days that I'm thinking, they're probably wondering, how in the world is she doing now? If I would have gotten more with just get comfortable being uncomfortable, knowing that those are the moments where you're going to have the greatest development.
And just on that, just to clarify, if videoing makes us uncomfortable and then we do it, clearly our comfort zone, for want of a better description, expands and encompasses being on video. Are you saying that we then need to find the next thing to be uncomfortable and then the next thing to be uncomfortable, and that it's a never-ending journey of improvement?
Yes, because you will get, let's say, for example, there's someone on this podcast that's thinking, wow, I use and ah a lot. I need to get rid of that. You'll get rid of it. If you start focusing on it, you have someone pointing it out to you, bringing to your attention every time you and ah, it will become annoying and you'll stop. Then you'll find another way to fill. What I have found, though, by taking all these techniques that you and I have talked about, you are always increasing your awareness, that you'll recognize the distraction that you're creating either through your messaging or through your body language as you continue to go through this process. So it's a very much of a stepping stone. I go back to that professional athlete or actor or actress or musician. Why do they never stop getting feedback? Yet living the corporate world or the association world, depending where you're coming from, why don't we work on our development? We have more impact on people than an athlete does. In sales, depending on the product that you're selling, you could be changing lives. And with all of that on your shoulders, there should be no question to why are we not focusing on how people experience us?
I feel like we need to put our heads together and build a product that sits in your pocket and electrocutes you every time you go, For me, I need one that electrocutes me when I start slouching. And if I talk, a BPM of talking, because I talk way too fast, and then also the length of my paragraphs, as you said earlier on in the show, every time I talk for more than 4 seconds, it shocks me. That we have like a Pavlov dog kind of system. That seems like seems like a hot. I'm only half joking as I say that. That seems like something that would give you a bit of a kickstart with all of this.
I love that. I think the same with my posture. I'm always working on my posture. I just need a little shocks to my system to let me know when I'm starting to slouch.
Love it. Love it. Well, with that, Stacey, we've touched on the book. I want you to tell us a little bit more about the book, where we can find it, and then where we can kind of, if we want to get some coaching, if we want to learn from yourself personally, how can we go about doing that as well?
Yeah, go to the website. I can always be the accountability partner from afar as well. We pump resources out there a lot to just help anyone out. And it's at our website, Stacey with an EY, HANKEINC.com. The book is there. The book is also on Amazon.
Perfect. Well, I'll link to that, everything that we talked about in this episode over at salesman.red. And with that, Stacey, I really enjoyed this conversation. And I want to thank you for your time and your insights and for joining us on the Salesman podcast.
Thanks for the opportunity. I had a good time as well.